A common saying used in the world outside of my antisocial sanction, also known as video games, is don't judge a book by its cover. Literally speaking, this particular saying is directed towards the books that would look seemingly uninteresting and completely benign to the person in question. It isn't until this person in question grabs hold of the book, completely disregarding the material and visually artistic value displayed by said covering, and begins to read at a suitable pace, word by word, taking in the value of the content bound by the cover, which only seemed to be, at worst, erroneous a short time prior. Before the reader knows it, he or she may have consumed foreign knowledge, or maybe they allowed themselves to go to another place after becoming enveloped in the setting written so efficaciously. That is not the case with Battlefield 4. In fact, it's the complete antithesis. Whereas the saying we just discussed is directed towards pieces of material or people who are suddenly judged and stereotyped thanks to a thin layer of preconceived repugnance, Battlefield 4's cover is absolutely breathtaking, astonishingly well crafted, and sexy as hell. However, the written content of Battlefield 4 leaves much to be desired. I can tell from the rushed pace of the story, the generic environments, and very poorly opted AI that Battlefield 4 was either rushed to the craze of capitalism, or there was a creative roadblock somewhere down the line that couldn't have been circumvented. Maybe it was because of a board of writers that all had copious suggestions and ideas, most of which can be rightly assumed to be conflicting with one another. Maybe it was because of something else, but whatever the reason may have been for the dramatic drop in narrative quality, EA made it very obvious that Battlefield 4's campaign was in a dire state, and it couldn't have been fixed. Euphemistically speaking, the campaign sucks. I'm not a graphics whore by any sense of the term, and I personally believe that if you are a graphics whore, that you need to hang up your keyboard and mouse and just denounce yourself as a PC gamer, but it has to be said that Battlefield 4 is the best looking game I've ever played since the original Crysis. This is the first game since the original Crysis that has made me ooh and ah my way through the first mission, focusing entirely on the textures and such and not the actual mission objectives themselves. If you were to compare the graphical quality of Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 in the 7th generation of consoles, the graphical difference isn't there. Some may even be very confused as to think that Frostbite 3 was inferior to Frostbite 2. However, on just about everything else, the difference is huge. Even on PC, Battlefield 3 looked like the console version with some deeper textures and motion blur, but Battlefield 4 has notable differences in lighting, feel, force, physics, and even motion blur. I had a hard time believing I was able to run what I was seeing, and even though I have more than a few discrepancies with the campaign, I was more immersed in the first mission of this game than in any other video game I have ever played. With that said, I can fruitfully label Battlefield 4's campaign mode as the most beautiful piece of garbage I've ever played. I'm being dead serious. EA has gone in a downward spiral with their published campaign modes, possibly as a result of these barbaric business practices overshadowing the quality. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant what once was. It's been like this since late 2011, but when Dead Space 3 released with a mess of a campaign that basically acted as One Tree Hill in space, I was more than disappointed. I was let down. Dead Space, up until 2014, was my favorite game of the 7th generation. Something is wrong here, although, to be fair, Battlefield has always upheld a nasty reputation for the declining quality of their campaign modes, but that still doesn't make it acceptable. Battlefield Bad Company was a military slapstick buddy comedy, and it worked like that. Why they needed to make it all serious in Bad Company 2 and pretty much defecate all over what we liked about the first game is beyond my comprehension as a human being. Battlefield 3 was not only just a ripoff of Black Ops, but it was a bad ripoff of Black Ops, featuring generally forgettable and uninteresting characters largely concerned by a MacGuffin, and a pitiful effort to compete with the action movie-styled, over-the-top World War III plot that modern warfare had not only established, but established well. With Visceral Games working on Hardline, I can only hope for a good campaign, but given that half of their track record is garbage and Dead Space 3's story as a whole was my biggest heartbreaker of 2013, my hopes are preemptively being flushed down the proverbial toilet. So one would be right in expecting Battlefield 4's campaign to suck. Badly. Does it? Well, at least I can say Battlefield 4 lived up to my expectations. Now, the first mission, Fishing in Baku, legitimately made me feel chills the first time I watched it in 2013 on Battlefield's website. Maybe it was because of how good it looked, and as a side note, Battlefield 4 in its alpha build looked exactly like Battlefield 3, but I was still hyped a bit, and I saw the potential for a great campaign. I really did. Well, that first mission is there in its entirety, but once you get over the drowning, the missiles, and the animosity emitted by the Chinese government, you will begin to notice a pattern that repeats exactly like this. Tedious bullcrap, and an amazingly lazy, glitchy, astoundingly boring cutscene. This is literally how the campaign functions for a good portion of the game. The cutscenes feel rushed, as if DICE was doggy-treating you for all of the pretentious crap you had to put up with. And I do mean pretentious. Especially if you die, you will be screaming like a child at your television or computer monitor about how you died and how you don't want to repeat the same section of that mission thanks to a poorly opted checkpoint system. You will play through 20-minute sessions, die, and then replay those same 20-minute sessions. I wouldn't have such a problem with it if the campaign felt like someone actually put time into it, but it doesn't. It feels like it was just tacked on. There are certain sections of this game that were literally painful to play through, especially considering that I was only a few clicks away from exiting out, launching Steam, and playing a better game. There are a myriad of problems that lead to this, including, but is not limited to, a half-assed story, poor AI, artificially inflated difficulty, rubber banding in a single-player game, and enemies having pixel-perfect accuracy, shooting you from seemingly impossible angles and even through objects. Not thin pieces of wood or through a wall, but literally huge chunks of rock. The story isn't interesting, the characters aren't developed enough for me to care, and it slips into the downright stupid around the 5th mission. I can hardly blame anyone for having opinions ambivalent to mine, as the story does a piss-poor job of explaining itself, ironically just like the last game. According to Wikipedia, the story takes place 6 years after the events of Battlefield 3. I'm assuming that Battlefield 3's protagonist fell off somewhere down the line because tensions have been growing between the US and Russia. Meanwhile, a very dubious Chinese politician, Admiral Chang, plans to overthrow the Chinese government. Upon doing so, Russia is completely under China's wing, and plans are set to wage war with the United States. Why they want to wage war isn't very well explained, but why don't we just overlook logic for this particular part of the review? You begin the game in a car that's sinking in the ocean. You wake up after being passed out for about 14 minutes before realizing that you're locked in with 3 other soldiers, one of which is trapped between a chair and the floor and gives you a speech before commanding you to shoot out the window so that others can escape. You do as you're told, and a big fuss is made about this for a good 2 missions. We then find out that this was only an intro, ultimately giving us 1 mission to connect with this character before he dies, but the mission is paced so rapidly that you aren't given time to. If the players don't care at this point, then it would seem pointless to drag on his existence through the next few missions. After this, the team escorts some important VIPs, after which they bring about 400 refugees aboard a military warship. Now I'm going to stop at this point in the review and ask, does this sound like a story so far, or a sequence of events made to simulate gritty war? The answer is the latter. I'm obligated as a critic not to spoil games unless I absolutely freaking want to, but I'm going to be nice in this review and say that all I just mentioned is the story at the very beginning. The air quotes story is nothing more than a series of MacGuffins tied by an extremely loose and almost fragmented narrative. The only story to be found in Battlefield 4 is that there are VIPs that hold special information about China, one of which joins your squad and seemingly betrays you before admitting to playing hooky, and then you reconcile like good boys and girls. There's also some irrelevant rivalry going on between 2 characters on the side. If you can notice how I didn't remember the names of most of the characters, it's because the story, or to be more precise, the lack thereof, isn't very memorable at all. There are a few moments that stood out, but it was either because of the insanely seductive graphics, or because what little potential was used to begin with was actually put into effect for a few seconds. By potential, I mean things that make a Battlefield game an actual Battlefield game. A Battlefield game is composed of real war scenarios that make excellent usage of environmental structures and physics and the operations of real war machines such as tanks, mortars, and the infamous death machine. I happen to hold the belief that I can forgive a campaign's crappy story as long as the gameplay utilizes its best assets to create an experience that does more than simply immerse, as if the game and the player were just to kiss and make up. Computer games today are mostly the obligatory time sinks, demanding your complete attention while sucking your life away with risk and reward systems. Other games would have developed farther than that to build on the experience, to exceed the expectations of the customer, to make him, her, it feel like they actually physically feel the events taking place, as if the only barrier between the player and the experience is a thin pane of glass making up your screen. Battlefield 4, unbelievably, does neither. Battlefield 4 plays like a Call of Duty graphics mod, and instead of using the environments, communications, machines, etc. to make the campaign better than it is, they're used minimally at best and almost not at all at worst. Undeveloped characters constantly dying doesn't make for an engaging story. It only makes for a waste of time at best, and a death fest that you wasted $60 on at worst. The campaign suffers just as much in narrative as it does in gameplay, and the PC version in particular was victim to a host of nasty glitches and crashes that seem to be fixed in the multiplayer portions, but not in the single-player portions. You'll fall through the floor, run a car straight into a pedestrian, only to have said pedestrian run right through you like nothing was happening, see an entire city evaporate before your eyes, and, as in any game that looks as beautiful as Battlefield 4, the occasional blocky texture that mercilessly rips you out of immersion. But the worst of it can be found within the cutscenes. Audio will clip in and out, you'll receive frame rate drops even though they are quite literally .wmv files, functional ineptitude with the skip key, and best of all, a 1 in 10 chance of your game crashing. I'm saying this for the single player as well as the multiplayer, that I would strongly advise that you buy this game only on one of the consoles, if you have that option. Preferably the PlayStation 4, as my graphical critiques get thrown right out the window on the PS3 and 360. These crashes and glitches are so frequent that I wouldn't be surprised if one of the applicants dropped dead in disbelief during playtesting. Save yourself the trouble and downgrade. As a PC gamer, it hits me hard because DICE has kept a well-earned reputation for wonderfully functional and optimizable PC games over the years. For them to release something as unstable in execution as this one legitimately surprised me, and I'm not ignorant, I've heard the horror stories of the multiplayer's functionality. Battlefield 4 is a first-person shooter, right? So that means the gunplay had better be worth it or we're wasting our money, right? The guns in BF4 look and feel fun to use, but satisfaction is only found within the usage of sniper rifles. Everything else can be satisfying, but after a while the gunplay dissolves into mindless shooting with a horrible cover mechanic that's hindered by yet another glitch that slowly moves you out of cover. Weapons this time around are distributed through ammo crates as part of an unlock system. You unlock new weapons by completing missions. This may seem good in principle, but you don't have the freedom to customize them, and they serve no other purpose than to give the illusion of meaningful progress, when really it's quite the opposite. This system may have been implemented to somewhat compete with Call of Duty Ghosts, but if they can't even allow weapon customization, then they aren't even worthy of competing with a campaign as rancid as Ghosts. They could have even built an RPG system around it, adding depth to the gunplay, but no. So after this review is said and done, and based on everything I just said, Battlefield 4's campaign literally fails in every aspect possible except for graphical quality. What you'll find in Battlefield 4's campaign is an embarrassingly large amount of wasted potential, and a 6-hour chore where difficulty is artificially inflated by functionality errors and glitches as opposed to actual difficulty. Don't get me wrong, the production is nice, the voice acting is in a league of its own, there are a few standout moments, and the graphics are spectacular, but to call this campaign anything more than below average is to judge the book by its graphically spectacular and supple cover, but the pages are poorly written and constructed and far more hideous than one would have thought. Battlefield 4's campaign seems like a waste product of overused ideas and military cliches that only the most unoriginal of corporate slaves could come up with at a moment's notice. While the programming feels like my computer is having a muscle spasm every time I run this game, Battlefield 4 fails in story, gunplay, gameplay, mission structure, and stability, and I'm sorry to say that just because a game is beautiful doesn't mean it's pretty.